Alright folks, here it is. This is our subcast, entitled Casting Dread, The Penny Dreadful Show. The 9th episode of the 2nd season of Penny Dreadful is entitled, And Hell Itself My Only Foe. It was written by John Logan and directed by Brian Kirk. How does Penny Dreadful keep doing it? How does it continue to top itself all week long? One of the great things about this episode is it concludes the stories of seemingly more than one character. So if you don't want to be spoiled, stop right now, but if you're listening to this podcast, you love it, and you've already seen Penny Dreadful, there's no excuse for it. Starting off, Ethan and Vanessa are still in the Cutwife's cabin. Mr. Roper comes to visit and threatens to kill Vanessa after he rapes her. Vanessa and Ethan kill Mr. Roper together. Victor Frankenstein, of course, knows where Vanessa and Ethan are staying, and he summons them back as Sir Malcolm is gone. It's not over yet with Ethan Chandler. The inspector knows what's going on with Ethan Chandler, and he also knows his real name. We'll get to that in a minute. The inspector seems like he has the upper hand. Interestingly enough, in the Wax Museum, one of the first things we see is a statue of Lucifer with one horn broken. And Caliban also compares Lily to Lucifer, as beauty is seductive and evil is seductive. Beauty, evil, and seduction all in one. We find out that Sembeni was a slave trader, and the marks on his face, he bears them as a sin he has to live with the rest of his life. Interestingly enough, Hecate steps forward, and we know a little bit more of why she's going against Evelyn Poole. Hecate knows Ethan's secret as the Lupus Dei and wants him to serve beside Lucifer. She knows he wants to feed with impunity, and he is deeply considering it. The duality coming once again to the forefront. As for Caliban, the blind girl tricks him into going a cell to retrieve a book and locks him inside. This is a pretty nasty thing. She goes in with her mother and father, and it's almost as if her disability tries to make her kind, and we're a bit thrown for a loop when that happens, and Caliban once again is imprisoned. Lily bites off Dorian's ear and wants to see his secrets, and we do. Seems like Lily is building something. A formation, a team. Dorian Gray, Caliban, Lily. The three of them, immortal, can't die. Interesting. Vanessa, of course, goes to save Sir Malcolm alone first, of course, as her stubbornness won't allow her to wait. The Dracula reference of Welcome to My Home, Miss Ives is immediately presented by Evelyn Poole, and Vanessa descends and possibly gets to meet her master. Most interestingly enough, at the end of the episode, Sembeni and Ethan are locked in a staircase, trying to get in, trying to save Vanessa. The moon starts to come up. Ethan wants to commit suicide because he doesn't want to kill anyone. Sembeni stops him. And then, when the moon is full, Ethan turns, goes after Sembeni, and tears his throat out. Saving Ethan from suicide, and yet his reward is death. So a couple things we're going to comment on. One, we were right. Lawrence Talbot, Ethan Chandler, his real name is Ethan Lawrence Talbot. How they got Universal to give that up, I'll never know. Or perhaps it's enough of a twinge to avoid copyright infringement. But whatever it is, it's brilliant. It takes us back to the Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein days, but very serious. It's trying to do what very few films and television shows have done and put these classic monsters together. So you have Lawrence Talbot, and you have Caliban, which is Frankenstein's creature. You have Victor Frankenstein. You have the Bride of Frankenstein. You have Dorian Gray. And of course, there's only one left from the party. As we stated last week, we know that he is coming, and he is coming with a vengeance. This episode is great. The editing is flawless, the directing is wonderful, the performances are so good. A lot of you are going to be angry about what happened to Sembeni, but we don't really know the full story. There's a little bit more to him than what it seems, so is he really dead? The history of Penny Dreadful would say yes. Someone important dies all the time. We saw it with Proteus, we saw it with Professor Van Helsing, we saw it with Fenton, and many others. So no one is really safe. How, then, do we go forward without Simbeni? How, then, do we go forward without possibly Sir Malcolm? And also, Victor Frankenstein is trapped. Is that all that's going to happen? Evelyn Poole stacked the deck, and yet Hecate is also there. The Lupus Dei has been unleashed. What is going to happen? We're going to find out next week on our season finale of Penny Dreadful, 10 p.m. Sunday showtime. The title of episode 10, the season finale, is And They Were Enemies. That could be referring to Dracula, that could be referring to Caliban, it could be referring to Vanessa, it could be referring to all of the above. I can't wait. So we've been having a lot of fun with predictions and theories, and that's something we generally stay away from, but Penny Dreadful is getting too good not to comment on it. So we're actually 1.5 out of 2. We were right about Lawrence Talbot, we were half right about Dracula and the devil being the same, but we were also half wrong in that Dracula and the devil are also brothers. And if you've listened to the entire reading of the Verbus Diablo, you know exactly what we're talking about. So here are some questions and theories from the season finale and beyond. The most important question is, who's gonna die? I have some odds here. Not included are the owners of the Wax Museum, who have seemingly all signed their death warrants. Cruelty is not a good indicator of life, especially in Victorian literature. So, from last to first, I put a 0% on Ethan and Vanessa, just for plain logic. There's no way that Josh Hartnett and Eva Green aren't going to return for another season of Penny Dreadful. There's too much money, there's too much marketing, and that'd be just a waste of time. There's also a very low chance of Dorian Gray dying, 5%, although he was taken almost completely out of the plot and I really don't see him as relevant. They are trying to somewhat bring him back into the fold with Lily, so I believe he will have a part in the thread and the narrative of Season 3. I also think there's a very low chance, 10%, of Caliban dying. Caliban is an immortal. He seems to be the real indicator of goodness on the show. If there's ever really a character who acts out of pure goodness or pure motivations, it seems to be Caliban. Even the killing of Van Helsing and Proteus was for a purpose. He was lonely, and on some level we can all understand that. Lily, although she has a chance to die, it is a very small chance. I put that at about 20%. Because of Billie Piper 1, the star power, and the story continuing on, and the evolvement of the story, there's a lot she can do with Victor Frankenstein, with Dorian, with Caliban, and with the world in general. She can also twist into the Lucifer plot line. Also, another character that I think has a low chance of dying is the Inspector at 25%. You guys might consider that a little bit low, but Ethan has to have a balance. There has to be some sort of human balance with all this supernatural stuff that's going on. Dr. Van Helsing was one of those forces. Mr. Lyle is back and forth. The Inspector, I think, is actually pretty safe to come back. The ones next, however, have a fairly good chance of dying, and I consider 30% a very good chance for Sir Malcolm. Sir Malcolm is interesting. He doesn't have a lot to live for, really. It's somewhat likely that we could see him die, but it's not outrageous at 30%. The same with Victor Frankenstein, although I consider him a little higher. If you recall in Mary Shelley's tale, Frankenstein, that Victor Frankenstein does indeed kick the bucket. So now would be a very interesting time to see him kick the bucket, and it also would affect Caliban very deeply if he did kick the bucket, thus putting Caliban in a bit of a crossroads. What does he do? How does he deal with the loss of his father? Things of that nature. Mr. Lyle and Hecate, I give them both 40%. Although there is a spoilerish scene with Mr. Lyle and Ethan which has already been released, that, of course, probably is not the end of the episode. The reason why I'm saying that is Mr. Lyle has had at least some dealings with evil, specifically Lucifer, and everyone has to pay their price. The same can be said with Hecate. Hecate is fighting multiple entities. She's fighting the failure of possibly Evil and Pool. She's fighting the failure of Lucifer. She's got Vanessa against her. She has possibly Ethan against her. There's a lot going on. And the biggest, of course, is Evil and Pool herself. There's a 50-50 shot. She is just so evil and so dark and so twisted that it's a 50-50 shot. Live or die. She's the one who I believe is in the most danger of kicking the bucket. Please, folks, I don't know why this would be the case, but if you haven't seen Penny Dreadful, catch up, and catch up quickly and immediately. Do it in 1080p, and do it as quickly as possible. You won't go wrong.